Morning, Craig.
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Obviously, tough few game stretch here, but normally you get to say that's why we play again tonight. But we're off tonight, so we got a little bit of a chance to catch our breath.
Well, I know it's early. The baseball people always tell me you got to wait, but we sit here with a quarter of the season gone, and team is hanging around 500. Bunch of these losses are one-run games. What, from your perspective as the chief baseball officer, what's going on there?
Yeah, I think we have 12 one-run losses, most in baseball, and normally you would say over the course of 162 games, these things tend to even out. But I think if you do that, you risk the chance of missing an important trend or failing to address something. And I think, at some point we have to look at our bullpen, and are we giving ourselves the best chance to win games? Are we getting the right guys out there? Are we throwing the right pitches? Do we have the right arms back there? It seems like the frustrating part is we're in a bunch of these games, but we're not doing, everything that it takes to win the game. We're not finishing them off.
Well, Craig, I'm glad you said that because Alex Cora talked about despite being swept in Detroit, he was happy with how the guys played. And I was just wondering where the line is of just not being okay with moral victories when you have such a talented roster.
Yeah, and that's why I think we have to look at some of these underlying trends. And it's true that we have a really resilient group, came back from some early deficits, had some really big hits. The offense kept us in games, kept punching back. But at the end of the day, we don't get a ton of credit for, the games that we should have won but didn't, or the expected outcomes. These things start to rack up. And when we have winnable games in front of us, we need to do a better job of winning them. That's the bottom line.
Craig, you said get the right guys out there. When do we kind of get past the Devers to first base? Who's going to play first base? Have you guys made a decision on what you want to do with Devers when it comes to that position, or are you focused on who is going to potentially be the next guy, whether it's, Gonzalez or some of the younger guys that you might have down in Worcester?
Yeah, I think we're evaluating all of those situations at the same time. I think there was the short term, we obviously brought up Toro, and then Romy got hurt, and we had Sogard, who's filled in, done a really nice job. But I think we want to think about what does this look like over the next few weeks, and then also, what does this look like longer term? So nothing has been eliminated, but we have to be realistic about, how long a transition might take. This was never something that we were going to have the answers to in a matter of days.
When nothing's been eliminated, does that mean that Devers is open to the opportunity should he be asked?
The conversations are ongoing. Obviously, this became very, very public last week, but I do think it's best when these things are resolved internally. So, we'll continue to talk through what the possibilities are, and we are going to be anchored. I've said this for a really long time, to what's best for the team. And as long as we put that first, we're going to be okay.
But what Devers said after you were on last week, following the game last Thursday, was that what in the best interest of the team? Devers' reaction to the conversation you had about first base?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like I just said, my preference is for these things to remain internal. But Raffy he's emotional, and he's invested, and he cares a ton about about the Boston Red Sox, and he obviously had some frustration that he shared kind of in real time. And since then, there have been a number of conversations and meetings. Obviously, John and Sam and I flew out to Kansas City. And I think the temperature has calmed down a bit, and we're going to continue to talk and engage.
So yeah, I was going to ask, and I appreciate the fact that you wisely at times want to keep it internal. But from your perspective, John Henry making the trip out there, that ended up being a positive when it comes to the working relationship between everybody.
For sure, and the details of the conversation are best kept in the room, but John, as the principal owner, getting on an airplane and flying to Kansas City to address this, I think shows how engaged he is and how much he cares and how highly he thinks of this group. I think that's evidence of the fact that we believe we've got a winning team and we believe in this team. We've just got to get ourselves on the right track.
Switching gears, Craig, we've talked about Tanner Houck before, but he's continued to struggle. Now, is the injury that's now placed him on 15-day IL, is that the reason for the struggles?
I think we'll find out, but it's always relevant if a player is feeling something, and the way that their bodies may compensate to try to avoid the discomfort, whether that's changing the delivery or changing pitch usage or the level of aggressiveness that you throw a pitch. And we've seen his velocity fluctuate over the last couple of weeks. He was throwing particularly hard in a handful of starts. The one in Toronto, I think, stands out. And then the velo was down a tick or a tick and a half. In his last one, the command wasn't quite what it had been. The slider had shortened up a little bit. So, I think the first thing and most important thing is we get him completely healthy, and then we'll identify the impact that has on his pitches and on his delivery and ultimately on his performance.
Craig, just one more quickly on the Devers, because it's been, as you can imagine, the biggest talker regarding your team the last week. We know that you were there with John Henry and Sam Kennedy. Obviously understand the private nature of conversations, but have you yourself spoken directly with Devers since last Thursday?
Yeah, I'm in communication with almost all of our players, including Raffy. It was a kind of casual interaction, but we'll continue to have the dialogue, and Raffy is always willing to sit down and talk. And obviously sometimes the nature of those conversations can be frustrating, but, I have to be willing to have the conversations that I think are in the best interest of the team.
And last one on that.
Don't use the Signal app, because that got the Secretary of Defense in trouble.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what Ken uses to send out our schedule.
He's on WhatsApp, Ken is. Yeah,
what's up? So, Craig, there's been some speculation as well regarding the relationship of you and the manager, that you may not be seeing eye to eye on this. How are you and Alex Cora dealing these days, and are you guys both on the same page as to the future of first base?
Yes. Alex and I talk multiple times per day. We bounce ideas off of each other in a very important and productive way. We don't always see things precisely the same way as it relates to in-game strategy and those types of things. And that's what makes, I think that makes for a really meaningful and important relationship. But ultimately, we are able to talk through our situations and, commit to a single direction going forward. So I think this idea of the disconnect or discord is significantly overblown here.
We talked about this a little bit earlier this morning, and I understand we're only a quarter of the way through the season, but the defense leads the league in errors, the offense leads the league in strikeouts, and the team leads the league when it comes to blown saves. For you, which is a bigger concern at this point in the season?
Yeah, and not to make light of that, but if you were to read those things out, you would say we must be 10 games under 500, right? But the reality is we've stuck around because I think despite those things we have done, we've had some strong individual performances. We have gotten some big hits and big outs, just not enough and not consistently enough. I think the one-run lead losses, the blown saves, that's the one that has the most stigma and emotional attachment to it, because it typically happens late in games and you're holding a lead. I think things like strikeouts are maybe a little bit more embedded in approach and potentially take a little bit longer to mitigate. So I think that the bullpen is something that can be addressed. And then also, I think with respect to the errors, there are times where you watch our team and you think this is a very, very good defensive team with strong track records of being good on defense, and some of the errors seem, and on the one hand, maybe some inexperience, particularly around first base and Christian as he gets acclimated to the big leagues. But I think we're going to look up and say, Alex Bregman has had another great defensive season, and Trevor Story is a very solid defensive shortstop, and that says nothing about the defense that our outfield has played. So that one's not as concerning to me so long as we're doing the work every day, which I know we are. But I think that the bullpen is certainly an area of focus, and then continuing the conversations with our hitting group on what we're trying to do before we get to two strikes, and then our need to compete with two strikes and put the ball in play.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time as always, Craig Breslow, and we will talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
That is the Red Sox front office report.